Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight, the show is devoted to folk singer and pacifist Pete Seeger, who died recently at the age of 94. And to talk about Pete Seeger, you have to talk about two things: his politics and his music. But we're not going to talk that much about his politics tonight. This is not a political show, but we have to mention Pete Seeger's politics. He was a leftist all his life. He was a communist much of his life. I don't think he was ever as forthcoming as he should have been about his politics. It hurt his career early, and in his mid-career, he was blacklisted for many years. But the world changed. His father, who was a pacifist professor at Cal Berkeley, was hounded for his politics before World War I and actually dismissed from his position. Today, that would be almost unthinkable. Time magazine hounded Pete Seeger for his politics in the late 40s and 50s, and today Time magazine is one of Pete Seeger's biggest supporters. So it's a different world. He'd be the first one to admit his politics influenced his music, but we'll try and stay away from that as much as possible tonight, and we'll just mention it with an occasional aside. Before we get to his music, our main report on Pete Seeger tonight will be from NPR and Paul Brown.
Pete Seeger died last night in New York. He was 94. Seeger was a folk singer, a political activist, an environmentalist, eventually an icon. He was also a major advocate for the five-string banjo. So to get a proper appreciation of Pete Seeger, it helps to turn to a banjo player. And we have just the man. Here's our longtime former newscaster, Paul Brown.
Pete Seeger was a tireless campaigner for his own vision of a utopia marked by peace and togetherness. His tools were his songs, his voice, his enthusiasm, and his musical instruments, as he told NPR in 1971.
Sometimes I think that old saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. Well, my one hope is the guitar is going to be mightier than the bomb.
If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, hammer in the evening, hammer in the evening, all over this land.
Pete Seeger came by his beliefs honestly. His father, Charles Seeger, was an ethnomusicologist and pioneering folklorist whose left-wing views got him into trouble at the University of California. Charles Seeger introduced his son to some of the most important musicians of the Depression era, including Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie. Seeger and Guthrie became fast friends, although they didn't agree on all things. They crisscrossed the country performing together.
Right around. Right around.
Seeger said that as early as 1941, they found themselves blacklisted.
We did one program on CBS radio. A newspaper reporter out said, "Red minstrels try to get on the networks." And that was the last job we got.
Seeger was a member of the Communist Party in those early days, though he later said he quit after coming to understand the evils of Joseph Stalin. Following World War II and service entertaining the troops, Seeger teamed up with Lee Hayes, Ronnie Gilbert, and Fred Hellerman to form the astonishingly successful folk group, the Weavers.
Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dream.
Their version of Leadbelly's Goodnight, Irene hit the top of the pop charts in 1950. Other hits followed, including On Top of Old Smoky, So Long It's Been Good to Know You, and Wimoweh. Ronnie Gilbert said that from the start, Seeger's performances were transcendent, whether you were on stage with him or in the audience.
You got the sense that he was saying and singing way beyond the moment that he was in, the place that he was in. Alone on a stage in front of thousands of people, literally thousands of people. Everybody got it. Everybody got his passion for music. People absorbed his passion and his ideals.
If the Weavers hit an emotional and cultural sweet spot in post-war America, the Red Scare quickly soured it. Seeger refused to answer questions before Congress in 1955 about his political beliefs and associations. He was held in contempt and nearly served a jail sentence before charges were finally dropped in 1962 on a technicality. But the troubles with Congress finished the Weavers as a major touring and recording group. Seeger went out on his own again.
I'm just a poor wayfaring stranger,
Shut out of the big gigs, he played coffee houses, union halls, and college campuses to support his family. His wife, Toshi, managed his affairs and raised their children in the cabin they had built in Beacon, New York. He co-founded and wrote for Sing Out, one of the first and most important magazines to grow out of the folk revival. He produced children's songs and books, but his commitment to causes never waned.
I say it's to the interest of every human being in the United States of America to get some good senators out of Mississippi for a change, and you can do it, and you will do it soon, I know. Now here's the song which Cordell Regan told you about. If I have a...
Seeger sang and marched nationwide for civil rights and against the Vietnam War. In 1968, he went local, but in a big way. Upset at the filth clogging the Hudson River near his home, he spearheaded the building of the sloop Clearwater, which volunteers sailed up and down the Hudson. Politicians and polluters had to take notice. Seeger, not surprisingly, saw a larger purpose.
Bringing these people together, all these people, is the essential thing. And this is what the Clearwater almost miraculously has started to do on the Hudson.
For all of his social activism, Seeger said more than once that if he'd done nothing more than write his slim book, How to Play the Five-String Banjo, his life's work would have been complete. Not just through his books, but through his sheer force of presence, Seeger became a model for younger folk musicians. Singer and songwriter Tom Paxton said he learned invaluable lessons from Seeger about how to reach an audience.
Look him in the eye, make a gesture of inclusion, which he did all the time, and above all, have a chorus. So I learned from Pete, to have something for them to sing.
To everything, turn, 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 there is a season, turn, turn, turn.
Bringing people together and getting them to sing out may be one of Pete Seeger's greatest legacies. But when it came to saving the world, Tao Rodriguez Seeger says his grandfather ultimately seemed to question whether the guitar was mightier than the sword.
Troubled him deeply that technology was so advanced, but our emotional state was so inadequate to cope, that with the push of a button, in a fit of rage, we could wipe ourselves off the face of the earth. And he really wanted to fix that, and always felt like he failed.
But if Pete Seeger didn't save the world, he certainly did change the lives of millions of people by leading them to sing, to take action, and to at least consider his dream of what society could be.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about Pete Seeger's music. As the report mentioned, he was part of the Weavers. The Weavers was the first great folk group. They were put together in Greenwich Village in the late 40s, so this is 10 years before the big folk revival in the United States. They were political. They were an offshoot of the Almanac Singers, which was a leftist folk group that meant to keep the United States out of World War II in the early 1940s. But they were superb musicians, and Gordon Jenkins, who was Sinatra's arranger, got them on deck and put together some great records for them, and they were huge in about 1950 with Goodnight, Irene. That was one of the biggest songs of the year. I'm going to play two of my other favorites by the Weavers, including an Israeli song called Saint It, Saint It, Saint It, introduced by Lee Hayes, who co-wrote If I Had a Hammer with Seeger and was also blacklisted. It features Seeger's banjo playing in the beautiful voice of Ronnie Gilbert. Take a close listen to this one. It was also a favorite of my producer Sid's father.
Friends, if you've been dancing to this song the last year, you'd like to know maybe that it came to us from the new land of Israel. We're singing now not only those new English words that we made up for that record with Gordon Jenkins, but also the original Hebrew words of this song that was written for lots of people to sing and dance together.
So those three, along with Fred Hellerman, were the prototype for Peter, Paul, and Mary a decade later. Here's Seeger and the Weavers with Weemawa, which became the prototype for The Lion Sleeps Tonight, and the ownership of that song has always been under contention. Well, the McCarthy era and the anti-communist hysteria of the mid-50s was not kind to the Weavers, forced them to break up. If you're interested in learning more about the Weavers, I urge you to check out the documentary Wasn't That a Time. I'm going to play you a couple of Seeger songs with a different take than you're going to hear in most places. Let's fast forward to 1965. Folk music is dying because of the British invasion, but the rockers are picking up on the folk trend, and Johnny Rivers, who was the feature singer for the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles, picked up on Where Have All the Flowers Gone. That's a Seeger song that was adapted from a Ukrainian folk song, and it became a famous anti-war ballad. Here's Johnny Rivers doing it as an a-go-go tune of the mid-60s.
Where have all the flowers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the flowers gone? A long, long time ago. Where have all the flowers gone? Young girls pick them, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn?
Seeger also wrote Turn, 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 which was the words from the book of Ecclesiastes. He added a couple of extra words, A Time for Peace, I Swear It's Not Too Late. And it was made famous by Roger McGuinn, another folk rocker, and the Byrds.
Well, I'd been a fan of Pete's, and I was at the concert where he introduced Turn, Turn, Turn after he had just written it. Advanced it a couple of years, and I'm in the Byrds, and someone asked me if I knew the song Turn, 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 and I pulled out my Rickenbacker 12-string and started playing it.
To everything turn.
And I did it differently.
There is a season, turn, 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 and the time.
I added some extra chords and put a Beatle beat to it to make it more like a rock song.
A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance.
We listened to it and we said, wait a minute, this would be a good single.
A time to cast away stones, a time to gather stones.
He sent us a letter, and it came to my house. And he said, Dear Birds, he didn't really know who was in the Birds. I love the way you did Turn, Turn, Turn. The 12-string guitar sounded like bells to him. I love the chiming bells. It was such a thrill. I mounted it in a frame and put it on the wall. It was next to my gold records. It was incredible.
I also want to play Seeger's other anthem, and that's If I Had a Hammer. In the early 60s, that became a civil rights anthem, and nobody sang a civil rights song better than Sam Cooke, so I'm going to play his version. Now, the irony here is this is his famous version that he sang at the Copacabana in 1964, 3 months before his death. He's being introduced by Sammy Davis Jr., and he's singing it for all the plutocrats. I don't think Pete Seeger ever intended it this way.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sammy Davis. I'd like to say tonight I'm taking the opportunity through tape to introduce to you a cat who's going to set the town on its ear. He's a good friend, swinging artist, and one of the nicest people I know. So, all you first nighters at the Copacabana, here is the swinging Mr. Sam Cooke. Go, Sam!
If I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, hammer in the evening, all over this land. I'd hammer out danger, hammer out a warning, not the hammer out love between my brothers and my sisters, no, over this land.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. I'm going to close with what I think was Pete Seeger's greatest performance, and it was certainly the most dramatic thing that I ever saw on television. Pete Seeger had essentially been blacklisted for television for almost 20 years, and he was brought back by the Smothers Brothers, and he was brought back to sing an anti-war song about the Vietnam War. He sang it in late 1967, and it was cut from the show. The Smothers Brothers protested, as they were wont to do, and so did Pete Seeger. So the Smothers Brothers brought him back at the end of February 1968, and this just happened to be right after the Tet Offensive. The country was shaken, the number of American deaths was skyrocketing, and the Smothers Brothers brought Pete Seeger back to television. He was defiant, he was in a sweater, he played a guitar, not a banjo, on a stark black stage, and he sang Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, referring to the old fool, and of course the old fool referred to Lyndon Johnson. There's no Vietnam reference in this song. There's no Lyndon Johnson reference. A month later, Lyndon Johnson decided not to run for president again. Listen to the emotion in Pete Seeger's voice. Again, the the most stirring performance I ever saw on television. I urge you to check it out on YouTube sometime.
Well, I'm not going to point any moral, I'll leave that for yourself. Maybe you're still walking, you're still talking, you'd like to keep your health. But every time I read the paper, them old feelings come on. We're waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on. Waist deep, neck deep, soon even a tall man will be over his head. We're waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on.